is the Vintage RPG Podcast, your source for the best in classic and contemporary RPGs. With your hosts, Hambone and Stu.
Welcome to the Vintage RPG Podcast, coming at you again from the clubhouse, hidden somewhere in the swamps of New Jersey. I'm John Hambone McGuire, and with me, as always, is the editor-in-chief of Unwinnable.com. He tried to have a Frazetta airbrushed onto his Subaru, Stu Horvath.
What?
Well, I felt like it was very thematic for the kind of fantasy art we're going to talk about today.
It's true, but why would I do? It's not a van, Hambone.
I know, but you know, soccer mom car is the new van. I think. I don't know. So today we've got a great show. We are going to talk a little bit later with Luka Rejec, the creator of Ultraviolet Grasslands and Witchburner. And speaking of Ultraviolet Grasslands and Witchburner, why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Okay, that's why I came here.
I think that makes sense.
The first thing that I was exposed to was Witchburner, which I don't really like. We could talk about it a little bit, but like I want to run it in October and I don't want to spoil it for you.
Yeah, please don't.
But it's super cool. It's like a really grim, dark, Slavic kind of feeling game where it's just like you're in the mountains and there's woods and you get hired to hunt witches.
Okay, sold American.
Yeah, this town has a witch problem and you're hired to figure it out.
I like.
So how do I talk about this game without spoiling it?
In very broad terms.
Yeah, so I think the thing that I find so fascinating about it is that it's a very micromanaged kind of game because like you have 30 days to do it in, right? And he segments every day into 4 segments. You need to sleep one of them. And each segment, it's not really like a set number of hours, but it's more like you could investigate thoroughly one thing in this segment. So like you constantly are sort of like, I want to talk to this person because I think that they might be the witch and I'm going to investigate them. So like, yeah, we would role play some of that out and figure it out and see if you found some clues. But at the same time, he's got it all worked out, all these other events that are happening around town. So like while you're talking to this one person, you know, Molly's cow dies and like instantly rots and turns to mush. And then everybody's like talking about that while you're already doing something else. You have like this cool time management thing. And like, I don't have to do any work.
Really?
Yeah.
As what do you call a dungeon master in this game?
It's basically system agnostic. So we're just going to run it 5th edition.
Oh, yes, please.
It doesn't matter because like you need stats a little bit, but it's mostly just like a social game. It's going to work a lot like Call of Cthulhu does. We would, wander around London talking to people.
Right. The way this game sounds to me, and I like this, is that you can Columbo. And that said, you can Columbo one thing. It's not like I'm going to go and hit this amount of stops during the day. You have one task, which kind of prevents you from metagaming.
Yeah. And it's supposed to be sort of like a pressure cooker because like while you're doing that one thing, 2 or 3 other things are happening and you might have wanted to do something else after this thing. But now you've got all these other options and they might be more pressing. They might not be. And people want the witch found. So like when you come to town, they're just like, the witch finders are here. Awesome. Let's get drunk. And like they show you around the town and you like,
yeah,
you
it
party
sounds like a
for
bad
while.
idea.
Yeah. Almost immediately, they're just like, why haven't you found the witch? And like you're constantly ratcheting the tension and pressure on you guys to deliver results. It works so well mechanically because everything is already laid out. Like I just have to kind of manage the flow of information. I don't have to come up with anything. It's great.
Well, I like that a lot. And in past conversations that we've had on the show, you always refer to horror as helplessness.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the most accurate descriptions of what horror should be. And to me, the ratcheting up of that tension and kind of knowing that there's this whole other thing happening in the background while you can only do one thing really does put that helplessness aspect into play.
It's really brilliant because like you're helpless while being proactive, which I think is like the worst possibility because you're racing against the clock. You're racing against everybody else. There's just so much and you're trying your best and it's not good enough.
Especially since the town people are jerks, sounds like.
I mean, it's a complicated situation. It's high tension. If we're sitting in Carney, if like people's pets started like just dying and
I don't want to think about that.
And turn into mush immediately, like people would be really freaked out. They would want somebody to fix it.
It's True. It is very true.
Like tensions would rise really quickly. I think that there's that veneer of civility that once, you put pressure on it, like it starts to crack really fast.
And that's something that happens naturally in Witchburner.
Yes.
You look at things like D&D, even looking at things like Call of Cthulhu, other game systems where because there is so much energy put upon the dungeon master, the keeper of secrets, the referee or whatnot to tell a story, they're kind of trying to control everything that's going on in front of them, which is, as our friend Daniel Fox said, like herding cats with your players. So you often will find you don't really have the mental bandwidth to kind of have what's going on in the background kind of happening. That's happening off screen.
Yeah.
Witchburner actually brings the off screen on screen and puts it right in front of your face.
Exactly.
That's very cinematic.
And it's all worked out. So like in Call of Cthulhu, when I needed to put pressure on you guys, like I had to come up with something to do it. Like otherwise you kind of meander along at your own pace until you fall into something that's like terrible, right? You would kind of bounce around talking to people, investigating it until like the bad guys really got wind of you.
And then we died badly.
Yeah. So there's like a real incentive to just not take risks. You just feel the time too much. Like it makes everything that you do have extra weight and importance. And you don't want to blow something on like a harebrained scheme,
Yeah. So being that it takes place over 30 days, how long does it actually take to do that 30 days in game?
I think that we could probably rip through it in about 2 or 3 sessions.
Well, I'm excited to play it. I know when this episode drops, we will just be shy of October. So this is something I'm really looking forward to for Halloween is playing Witchburner.
I mean, Witchburner, that name, it's such a good name.
We fight a Baba Yaga or we riot. I'm just saying it out loud right now.
It's like so metal.
It is so metal.
Witchburner. Anyway, so his second game is Ultraviolet Grasslands, which I have a really hard time saying. So we're just going to go with UVG.
Okay.
Which works. It's like UV rays, UVG, right?
Sure. I'm going with it. Feels good.
Yeah. All right. So UVG is like a completely different kind of game. It's like this huge travel game. You start out in the Violet City and you're traveling west to the Black City. And nothing is pre-planned. Everything is random tables. Everything is about traveling. Like you travel a lot.
I do travel a lot.
You go to a place, you see some cool stuff, you meet some interesting people, and sometimes something freaking crazy happens, right?
Sometimes you end up in a house with a woman who chases Bigfoot.
Yeah, there you go. that happened recently. Yeah. So that's sort of what Ultraviolet Grasslands is like. There's a series of cities and landmarks and strange locations and factions and interesting characters, and you just kind of travel. Like, yeah, sure, there's danger. There's a couple dungeons. There's some monsters that you could maybe fight. But I think that it's really about the experience of getting this sort of sense of wonder from this really weird, psychedelic, trippy landscape that Luka has come up with.
It's pretty impressive. Being that most role-playing games involve travel, most travel takes place from a very distinct A to B.
And usually with a snap of the fingers in between, right?
Exactly. Especially when you get older because you don't have as much time to play these role-playing games with your friends. So, we're going to fast travel almost everywhere.
Yeah.
No random encounters in the forest anymore.
I love random charts. I think random charts are the best thing that's happening right now. Like people have just like kind of gotten into it. And like there's random charts for everything in this game.
Yeah, we are men who likes a random chart and a glossary.
Yep. Oh, there's such a good index in this book.
Ooh, tell me more.
I was talking to Matt from Exalted Funeral, and I feel like the index was a real pain in the butt to make. I feel like that is true of all indexes, and I appreciate that. I appreciate how much hard work it is.
Yeah, you don't really get the scope of the journey, but man, the destination, worth it, man. It's worth it.
So UVG has an onboard little system called SEACAT, which I think is really great. It's really brilliant. It's like phase rip with Marvel. It stands for your characteristics, right? But it's all real simple, real kind of like noodly. Like you can kind of mess with it.
Low barrier to entry.
Exactly.
Everyone come on, it's a party.
And like low barrier to entry that it super encourages just being like weird, and like just experiment, play with it. Like don't get hung up on like what's right or what's wrong. Like let's just like have a good time and make a good story together.
Well, the art is very psychedelic. And I think with a book that has so much delicious psychedelic art in there, you can't really have a rigid system, right? Because it would kind of be a stark contrast to what the actual art is like. You'd be sending two different messages. So SEACAT and the psychedelic art go hand in hand like peanut butter and chocolate.
And with the overall theming of the game, because a lot of the game is sort of about the chaos underneath. So like you have this, again, a veneer of like reality, and then there's all this weird stuff bubbling through it. And like all of this goes back to like this super rich psychedelic metal tradition of like not even just metal, like Blue Oyster Cult, Yes record albums, like
Frog.
all of these like crazy evocative record album art paintings is like, and I don't know how much of this, Luka, necessarily directly drew from, but like I look at his stuff and read the book and I'm immediately like thrown back to all of those rad records that like I was fascinated with, even if I didn't like the music. Like I'm not a Yes guy. Like I'm not proggy. I don't.
Yeah.
But like,
Sorry,
man,
Don.
some of those covers, geez, like they're just like so evocative of a place, and like D&D never really takes you there. Like D&D is like a different kind of fantasy. Like this is something weird.
Well, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You would go and you'd see these amazing album covers, and you'd want what is on that vinyl to match what you're seeing on those album covers. And a lot of times they just don't jive together.
No.
Whereas the SEACAT works so perfectly, because SEACAT works with exactly what the art is kind of showing you.
Yeah, with the random tables and everything. And yeah, like Molly Hatchet. Like what about Molly Hatchet matches the Death Dealer cover?
Nothing.
Nothing about Molly Hatchet is equal to Frank Frazetta's Death Dealer.
I mean, what I could say about that is one dude in Molly Hatchet probably had like really, really good taste and was able to be like, guys, this is what needs to be the album cover. But then every time I would put it on a Molly Hatchet album, like, and let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, it only took one time of putting that Molly Hatchet album on where I was like, oh, okay, I kind of went in thinking it was going to be one thing and it was something dramatically different.
Yeah, I did the post on Frazetta realizing for the first time like how amazing his artwork is. And I got fooled again. I tried Molly Hatchet. I was just like, man, no, this just isn't what it should be.
I mean, you got a good name there, Molly Hatchet, which is, to me says they couldn't get Lizzie Borden. Just that is my first instinct with Molly Hatchet. And then you got that awesome Frazetta art. And I've been to the Frazetta Art Museum, and I encourage anyone, if you can get there, it's definitely worth the trip. It's run by one of his kids, and there is such a passion for the Frazetta art there. And it's got a very big gift shop because obviously, they need to make some money. And that Molly Hatchet artwork is there. Like some of it's like right there. And you're just looking at it and you're like, oh God, if you only could live up to what's on the outside.
But this is sort of like an interesting thing. Like Frazetta is a very specific kind of thing. And I think that D&D carries that forward, like that aesthetic. He's got lots of earth tones. It's very dark and evocative in sort of like a pulpy kind of way. That comes out of those horror comics, eerie and creepy. And you can see the DNA going forward into D&D. And then you get the Elmore and all of that high fantasy stuff. But like, I think that overall D&D's visual palette is muted and fairly realistic. And then you have like Yes album covers where like D&D never really tread. Like maybe a little bit with Spelljammer, maybe a little bit of like Planescape is too goth, too industrial. Dark Sun is too like S&M, Mad Max. Like all of this stuff has like a grit to it. What I'm basically trying to say is like, I've had this long time thing with 5th edition. I'm just sort of like, meh. Because I want there to be like a weirdness, right? I'm beginning to come to terms, ladies and gentlemen, with the fact that I'm just not going to get it. And that's fine. I think that I'm wrong. Maybe I'm asking too much of 5th edition because there's plenty of weird people making weird stuff like Ultraviolet Grasslands. That's filling the need. It's not like this stuff doesn't exist. I just want to have like a Wizards of the Coast logo on it for some reason. It's just stupid. Like let's just embrace the weird shit that we've got.
And Luka is making some plenty weird stuff. And I will tell you, I love it because his color palette is in that fine 4-color Marvel grand tradition.
Yeah, but it's never the 4 colors that you expect.
Exactly.
Or the ones that necessarily go together. There's something about it.
There's always that pop.
Everything seems like almost like it's been irradiated. You know what I mean? Like, but not like irradiated Mad Max, like irradiated through like magical experiments and drugs.
Don't do drugs, kids.
Don't do drugs.
We're not encouraging you to do drugs.
There's an aesthetic there. Like you could probably pull it back to like Yellow Submarine and that Beatles kind of psychedelic stuff. If you
the Beatles were doing a lot of drugs.
Yeah, I'm not really into that. But it's cool seeing sort of visual traditions like that aren't the ones that you think of when you're talking about fantasy role-playing games,
This is very true. Now, one thing that maybe we should have led with is that you can't actually get Ultraviolet Grasslands right now.
Yeah.
It's in the process of being finished up, and you're going to hear a little bit more of that when we talk to Luka in a few minutes. That said, I encourage everyone out there to go and check out his Patreon, Wizard Thief Fighter, and pretty much every social media that he has is Wizard Thief Fighter.
Yeah.
It's all one word. And you're going to get to see some of this amazing art for yourself as he finishes up the art for UVG.
Yeah. And I just want to point out that Wizard Thief Fighter, if you abbreviate that, it's WTF. And I think that that's the funniest thing.
Whoa. I didn't even figure that out. You said that.
Yeah. Witchburner has it's like WTF Studios or whatever. And I was just like, that's amazing. Like, that's just like such a sneaky, what was that stupid Van Halen album name?
Oh, for Unlawful Carnal Knowledge?
Yeah. And it's just like, it's like that, but like good.
Yeah. Although, listen, growing up, in fairness, when that album came out, I mean, I remember when the album came out, and I was looking, I was like, man, I need to get this album For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. I was like, man, why would they name the album For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge? I was like, what a stupid album name. For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge. F-U-C. Oh. Yeah, my mind was blown. I'm glad my mom never figured that one out.
Yeah.
It was right there.
Sammy Hagar is terrible.
I don't know, man.
Wait. Sammy Hagar is terrible.
Yeah, I can't argue that.
H-I. Oh, I did it. I did it to you. Oh, is that one going to get edited out? I feel like
we never actually said anything that I'd have to edit out. All right, folks. So in the meantime, we want you all to stick around because we have an awesome interview coming up with Luka Rejec. And I've been working very hard on to pronounce that name correctly. In the meantime, definitely go and check out Wizard Thief Fighter on every form of social media, and check out Witchburner and anything that you could find on Ultraviolet Grasslands. Hit up our friends at Exalted Funeral.
Absolutely.
Because while you're waiting for Ultraviolet Grasslands, our friends at Exalted Funeral got the stuff. They got so much good stuff.
I don't know how Exalted Funeral does it. I don't understand how they have such good taste. They're constantly adding more stuff that I want, to the point where, like, I just can't take out a second mortgage for Exalted Funeral. The taste level is so good. There's so many interesting things there.
They're like Sub Pop in the 90s, where every album they put out is great.
Even some of the stuff that I'm just like, I don't know about that, but it looks kind of cool. Like, and I would buy it if I had the extra money.
All right, folks. So that's our talk on Witchburner and Ultraviolet Grasslands. Luka was so kind. He called in from
South Korea.
Yeah, of all places. And the time difference is kind of wonky. We're recording this right now at 9:30 p.m. in the United States. And
on a Saturday.
On a Saturday night. And it was Sunday at 7, 8 o'clock in the morning for him?
10:30 in the morning on Sunday.
Well, it's good we let him sleep in a little bit.
Yeah, we don't want to drag the guy out of bed.
All right, folks. So here we are, the vintage RPG interview of Luka Rejec. Hey, Luka, how's it going?
Hey, Hambone, it's going fine. It's a Sunday and I'm working.
Oh, there you go. Hey, I know all about that. That's my life.
Yeah, for us, it's Saturday night.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're busy worker bees on the weekend.
Yeah, when you don't have a traditional job, you work all the time.
Oh, yeah, it bleeds over into every single day. Yeah, that is actually a super hard thing for me to figure out, how to take breaks. Can I tell a joke at this point? Well, it's not a joke, just mildly inappropriate.
Sure.
One of the things I loved when I was working full-time was that when I had to use the restroom, I was getting paid to do that. And now I can't do that anymore, and I feel like it's a great loss.
I appreciate that. I'm going to bake that into my philosophy from now on.
Yeah, getting paid to pee.
So let's start off briefly with Witchburner, which is the first thing that I came across of yours. Where did Witchburner come from?
A large chunk of it came from a bunch of different adventures that I ran over the years for my regular game groups. They were all sort of intermingled in there, that kind of setting and the sort of tension and the sort of the investigation going on. And the setting itself was heavily inspired by doom metal and occult metal and witchy metal and stuff like that, but also very much by the place I'm from. So I really leaned into the environment. I'm from Slovenia, from the west of it, in the mountains, and there's a lot of forests and pine forests around it. And yeah, I wanted to capture that in an adventure very much. And the rest of it, with all the witches and all that. The album by Witchfinder General, that was something I wanted to capture in an adventure. And I think I sort of succeeded.
I definitely think you do. I think that comes across so clearly is the musical influence, which is sort of why I wanted to start with it, because I think the same thing is going on in Ultraviolet Grasslands, right? That is totally springing from album art and heavy metal and all sorts of stuff. And I kind of wanted to go into that.
Oh yeah, very much. It came from that. And the final thing that actually really helped make Witchburner what it was because just a short while before I started really writing it down and putting it together in the form, I actually came across this ethnographic work on the old faiths that and the remains of them that were still left in the highlands around where I'm from. So it's this massive tome of basically interviews and field notes and stuff like that by a guy who spent 40, 50 years interviewing people there in the 60s, 70s, 80s.
Oh, wow. So this book of lore that you got, that kind of ties it all up?
Well, I wouldn't say it ties it up. It was a big inspiration because it goes into really massive details of some of the things, like, for example, how different shrines were created or how different natural features were treated as sacred. What different symbolisms were used. So it's stuff like how different stones were placed on properties to pay homage to the local spirits and the different gods and deities and stuff like that. So it's very much an outgrowth of this traditional, what nowadays most people call pagan beliefs and religions. And a lot of the elements in it are pretty close to Slavic mythology, sure, but it's really intertwined. It's basically old European faiths and the way it works. So it sort of informed the way I tried to present some of the old beliefs and some of the, let's say, rituals that are present in the book.
And the way it all clashes.
Oh yeah, that whole thing, the way it's set up at an intersection between one major city to the east and one major city to the west and stuff like that. Yeah, I was trying to capture that part of the environment of it being sort of a frontier between different powers. Let's say a no man's country, but obviously it's not no man's, but
the thing that I think is super interesting is that you're kind of hitting on all of these ideas that are all sort of present in Ultraviolet Grasslands, right? Like there's the two cities, there's all of this remnant of previous cultures that you're exploring, and then there's the heavy metal influence. So how did you get from Witchburner to Ultraviolet Grasslands?
Actually, the order of things is reversed. I wrote the Ultraviolet Grasslands first. Witchburner was published first because it was shorter. So the Ultraviolet Grasslands, it was basically after a lot of, well, let's say stressful work stuff from when I was still, working in a company full time. So let's just call it what it is, workplace harassment, from which I spent a long time covering. I spent quite a bit of time writing this really grim, dark, terrifying adventure where it turns out that the players are being played by a sociopathic deity. And then at a certain point, I decided, no, this is bullshit. I don't want to keep reliving this. So at the same time, I'd also started a Patreon back in late 2016, and I didn't really know what to do with it. I started out by like, okay, maybe I'll do an illustration now and again, and it'll be paid per month, and then I'll have like a little vote, where does the adventure go, or stuff like that. But it wasn't really working for me. So eventually, I just decided, what the heck? I'm just going to illustrate something I really like and that I find really uplifting and fun. And that was this sort of like doom metal, psychedelic revival style adventure. This long, strange trip inspired by all the music and things like the Heavy Metal magazine, if you guys know it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All this over-the-top imagery and like the heavy pounding riffs and the bass lines and just that feeling like it's massive and huge. And so I just sort of like started playing with that. And I had an idea of where I wanted to take it because there was this idea of the city at the edge of time and space, which is, again, this like ancient trope in all this stuff from Moorcock's Tanalorn to The Lord of the Rings, when they have the Valar live beyond the West and whatever. It's an old trope as heck, but I just wanted to make my own twist on it by just taking myself and anybody who sort of followed along on this trip. And it somehow just resonated with a lot of people and took on a life of its own. So that was super fun. And then Witchburner was sort of a switch from that, where I had gone for this epic, massive trip to this little claustrophobic little thing. I mean, it's not that small, but it's like intensely detailed. It's a small town done with 30 days, and then like each of the days it's like broken down for the game master, like the weather that's happening every quarter day and like when weird things happen and so on. Whereas like Ultraviolet Grasslands is massive. And the whole idea is that you go on this trip across the whole continent.
That's an interesting contrast because I think that Witchburner is like really micromanaged in a good way because like it gives me everything that I need to handle each segment of each day. But, you know, philosophically, that's completely the opposite end of the spectrum of Ultraviolet Grasslands, which is expansive and huge and very random. What was it like shifting from the macro to the micro?
It was super fun because I got to focus in on the people and the details. I think that also as a writer, I got a little bit better by the time I was writing Witchburner, because I managed to tease out a lot more of the character and the NPCs, which in some ways I think is often one of the weakest things of many adventures and games, because it's super hard to make an interesting character and then make it in such a way that like referees can also use it and present it easily. But at the same time, that really hard thing is also the one thing that is super memorable. Like if you look at Dungeons & Dragons franchise, basically everybody knows like Vecna and maybe like Acerak and Lord Soth, and you've got like Raistlin Majere, and you've got like Elminster. Oh, I hated Elminster when I tried to run Forgotten Realms. But it's, you know, it's memorable. Both as players and as referees, we really remember characters. Like I noticed the same thing when I was refereeing my own games. It would be like some returning characters would be the ones that would get super memorable. I still have players who like remember this vampire lord that they awakened from its crypt, unleashing a plague of undeath on their world. It sort of felt to me like a nice change of pace where I could really focus in on the characters. It wasn't hard, but it was interesting.
Ultraviolet Grasslands is sort of a showcase of your artwork. You've written the whole book and you've done all of the art. Are you using UVG to create sort of like a web that connects all of your existing artwork?
Mostly I'm making it for UVG. Some of it gets reused, but a lot of it is specifically for that. And it's actually sort of a trap I got myself into due to the process, because I wrote the thing first and did the art first before having the final layout. And then I ended up with a lot of gaps or places where I could use more art. And then I decided that I was not going to have any page that has like a random white gap. So I decided I was going to fill everything. That's partly the reason that it's going a little bit more slowly than planned.
There's something like 300 illustrations, right?
Yeah, something on that order.
Oh gosh, that's a lot.
Yeah, I've got another 90 left to color. And I've already done about 210.
Oh my God. That's so much art.
They're gorgeous, though. They're absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous, and the color work on it is some of my favorite that I've seen in RPGs in the last several years.
It's super unique, and the subject matter is so sort of effortlessly weird, and weird in a way that I have a hard time seeing what it calls back to. I don't see a heavy influence of anybody else in there. Maybe Mobius. I said to John earlier, the cover art for Dope Smoker seems to be like a thematic thing, but not in terms of like style, you know? I have a hard time kind of picking out your inspirations.
A big one is definitely Mobius. Another artist that I like very much is Hugo Pratt, who did Corto Maltese. So he has this really incredibly loose and flowing brushwork. I like the work of an artist called Kaza very much. And another one that has been actually quite an influence in some ways is Rejec. It was an influence in terms of the fine line work.
Yeah, I could totally see that now that you mention it. It's like little starbursts in my eyes. That's cool.
The other thing that I also actually like a lot is traditional brush painting. You can actually catch that really a lot in some of the trees and the nature and the way I paint that.
What's your approach to color? You use like sort of a limited palette plus an odd sort of psychedelic color combination, and I think that makes it really different.
There's always that pop.
Yeah.
It stems from actually something I don't like about a lot of modern comic books and modern fantasy art, that it all sort of looks the same in different ways. Like comics have this different sort of stylized aesthetic they're going for, but they have this very similar styles of coloring with these gradients and flows. And a lot of modern fantasy art is just digital fantasy realism, where it's like, oh my God, I can use Photoshop and I can now do digital oil painting in it, and I can like smudge it around and it looks cool and dynamic. And at the same time, none of it really stands out.
It's all mushy and kind of unfinished looking. And yeah, I totally am on your vibe.
To be fair, a lot of it is really good, but it just doesn't stand out in some specific way. It misses this focal point. So the choice to limit myself on the color palette is partly because I like that, Like, again, if you look at Tintin or some of these comics, the way they're colored, the color palettes are generally super limited. Partly this is because of the way the comics were done, because you have to get the comics done fast. So using a limited palette is actually a simple trick to save time. Like if I wanted to do a full-on painting with like realistic colors and everything like shifting from one shade to another and the full spectrum of chiaroscuro and so on, and I'm trying to do 300 pictures. It's like, yeah, okay, see you in a couple of years. And I like both the writing and the drawing and the painting parts. So I'm sort of forced to find a way to make art fast. It's partly because I like it, but partly also just constraints.
I feel like you've dug yourself quite a hole there.
Yes. But, it's looking really good now, and I have this massive pile of art. So, in the interest of being able to do stuff with it, making an art book out of it, or making like a player-facing book just with different locations or different stuff like that, is going to be super simple now because there's hundreds of pictures to just slot in and then add.
UVG comes with its own little system on board, SEACAT. You developed that yourself?
Yeah.
What was your kind of guiding philosophy there? It's very simple and very customizable, right?
Yeah. The origins of it are actually 10 years ago. It was still 4th edition at the time, wasn't it?
Oh, geez, yeah.
So back then, I ran like a single campaign. Like when 4th edition came out, it was like, oh, well, this is the new thing. This is like the new and improved Dungeons and Dragons. Sure, we're going to run this as the regular group. And I ran like a single group straight from level 1 to level 13. And if you guys have run 4th edition, you will know that is a lot of work for the game master.
Yes, I know that very, very well.
Yes, it was intensely annoying because I like the Dungeon Master games with relatively low prep, and running 4th edition that way, wow, it really rubbed me the wrong way. And I started looking for something different. So I discovered this thing called Microlight. It's like this super simple 3-stat, 4-skill, D20 based rule set that's free online, but it was a little bit bigger 10 years ago, but it never got that much traction. It never had, like, as far as I know, a pretty book with art. Maybe that changed later, but I used that sort of as the skeleton for the structure. I was like, this works. This like gets to the core of what D&D is, which is you have like the flat 20-sided die and you add some numbers and you try to get over a target number. So it's getting there. And then I hacked apart 4th edition to get like the abilities and powers to make this sort of like random character creator out of that. And then I made this hyper gonzo game for my friends, which I ran, which was essentially all the characters starting as political prisoners in a space gulag who are volunteered to explore a floating hulk in space. The random character generator was fantastic, I thought. I'm not sure about the players. I think they had fun. It came out a lot like Paranoia in some ways. Like one of the characters was a political commissar with a pistol to shoot the others in the back if they tried to retreat. Another one was a poet with a flower pot. And the third one was a combat-augmented, uplifted chimpanzee that could tear people in half with their bare cybernetic hands.
That's a combo.
And the first one to die was the chimpanzee because he charged a defense turret in the floating hulk straight down the tunnel, and they found out that I had not balanced anything because this thing like dealt 130 hit points of damage to him, and he had 30. He thought like he was super tough because like the poet had 10. So just like ripped this chimpanzee apart. Then we ran other games with like modified versions of it over time. And then when 5th edition came, I like adjusted and tweaked a few things. So at its core, SEACAT is a pretty simple D20 plus modifier roll over target system. But then I started polishing it further, especially last year as I was getting ready to release it, which I still haven't gotten around to because, life happens. The basic part of it was I also came across another requirement, which is I found out that in the person of my wife, I had an audience that was actually perfect for figuring out how to write and describe a role-playing game that uses natural language. So something that's been bothering me more and more about Dungeons & Dragons and 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons is the jargon that makes up so much of the game and that makes up so many role-playing games, because it just keeps coming up as this as this big and annoying stumbling block to new people joining the hobby. Like you come in there and it's like, oh, and this is your armor class. Okay, so why is it a class? Like, why is it armor class? I mean, classes are like the jobs, right? So why is it the armor class? Why are they called hit dice if I don't hit anybody with them, and they're not even dice at the end of the day, and they're doing something completely different? Why are they called hit points when they're not, again, hitting anybody, and stuff like that. So I started peeling away at some of the language and streamlining it and trying to get to the sort of core of what it was about, and turned out, at least from my perspective, and I might be completely wrong, and this might just be my opinion, and I might be like going off the deep end, but the idea was, as the master, what you're essentially presenting to the players at any given time is different challenges, different tests. So when the player says, oh, I want to climb the tree, what you're doing with the dice is essentially giving the players a probability of success. That's it. And as the game master, the only thing you're really doing is sort of semi-arbitrarily eyeballing what is the difficulty of a certain thing. And I try to streamline it towards this with just using like regular language. So it's, for example, if something is easy, it's an easy test. If something is hard, it's a hard test. And then that has numbers associated with it. So in standard D&D 5th edition parlance, that would be like, if you have to roll over 15 for a difficulty class, that's basically a hard test. If you have to roll over 5, that's an easy test.
Right. The thing that I find really interesting about SEACAT is it's so streamlined and simple, and you can pull it in any direction you need to. You can make up skills on the fly and just kind of make it work for your players, and it's very welcoming, which is a little interesting because it's a game about psychedelic metal and road trips and like transcendent horrible experiences that might befall you. So it's really cool that you've created a welcoming game so that people could die horribly.
Yeah, that's the idea. First hit is always free,
Yeah. I'm being a little unfair. I said that you made a game that's about killing your players mercilessly, but that's actually not the case. And I think that's really interesting, is that UVG is sort of, I feel like the focus is on travel and exploration and sort of experiencing the world. Like, there's plenty of danger, but there's also like meeting people and experiencing cultures along the way. And I think that it's really interesting because I didn't really know that you had kind of bounced around, all over the world, living here and there. And I was wondering if that influenced the game.
Yeah, of course it did. Going to different places and seeing different things made me realize that I don't actually know that much, and I don't understand that much, and that things are often a lot more interesting and complicated, even really ordinary things, than they seem at first glance. So yeah, it definitely is a lot more about that, about the experience. And I sort of try to even capture that in the SEACAT system, because instead of actually characters necessarily dying when they run out of life, there's this what happens when you run out of life table. And the whole idea is that characters might end up actually like surviving their last fight, and then they just like decide, no, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm retiring now. And players then get the chance to generate the next character, and then the next character, and then the next character. So the story goes on, the journeys go on, and it's not necessarily that like the journeys end because, oh, character is dead now. No, they just went off to do other stuff.
They got tired of it.
Yeah. If they were lucky.
All right, Luka. Well, I've seen some preview bits of the UVG, and I am super excited for it to finally get released and get into my hands. Now, in the meantime, one of the things I know you have going on is a Patreon. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
You're right. It's a Patreon. It's called Wizard Thief Fighter, just all together. And it's where I release new adventures, new content, sort of monthly, each of them more or less laid out with art. And it's also where I actually wrote the UVG. So if they want to join up there, right now I'm working on Long Winter, which is sort of a semi-sequel to Witchburner in the same or a similar-ish world and has some similar vibes. But it's this survival horror adventure set in a remote mountain valley where this harsh winter comes down, and then the players have to decide how to handle that situation. So it's wilderness survival or survival horror. And it has very cheerful art.
All right, Luka, very cool. Where can our listeners find you online?
Most of the big social media, there's something under Wizard Thief Fighter. I couldn't believe it when I went looking for the username. Nobody had actually used it yet. Only Twitter is just @StratoMetaship.
All right, Luka, it was amazing talking to you tonight, and we look forward to talking to you again when UVG drops.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that too. You guys have a great night and take care. And thanks for this conversation.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, man. Thanks to Luka Rejec for spending some time with us and telling us more about SEACAT, Witchburner, and Ultraviolet Grasslands. Stu, where can the people find you?
They could find me on Instagram at Vintage RPG, posting stuff about vintage RPGs all the time. Like, I used to do one post a day. Now I'm doing like stories. There's so much stuff. There's vintagedrpg.com where there's like essays, and I'm just giving over my entire life to vintage RPGs. So just follow me and ingest it all.
Let the wave of fantasy take you, Stu. You can find me at John Hambone McGuire on Instagram, where I post my day-to-day adventures in podcasting and in life. You can follow me on the Twitter at Handbreaker. I tweet about cute animals, I tweet about Dungeons and Dragons, and I tweet about professional wrestling. You can also check out my other podcast, My Thai Happy Hour. It's pop culture for weirdos wherever podcasts are found. So for Stu Horvath, I'm John Hambone McGuire. May the dice always roll in your favor.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Every review helps other listeners to find us. The Vintage RPG Podcast is a ham-fisted production. Music by Dego West. Art by Schaefer Brown. If you like the podcast, you should also consider becoming a patron at patreon.com.